Okay, we're beginning on 41B4. 41B4. Get this a little higher. Here we go. Much better. 41B4. Okay, and we have got into the very interesting situation of knowing of the topic of the red wool string, which apparently is a big deal because it was attached to one of the two goats that were sent that we were dealing with on Yom Kippur. One that was for Lashem Chatas, for Hashem, a sin offering, possibly got a red piece of wool on it. The goat that was sent Lazazel, that was sent Limishtaleyach, that was sent out to be thrown down the mountain, got a red strip of wool tied to it. And the question only was, would it turn white to show that we had been forgiven? It turns out that the Parah Aduma, the red heifer that was used, that was slaughtered and it was burnt, and its ashes were mixed with the water in order to purify somebody from tumas meis, from contamination from a corpse. The ashes, red wool was also included in there. So this is all that the Gemara today is going to be tackling. What's going on with this strip of wool, red wool that was attached to our stuff? So it says the Gemara. We are on 41B4, the last paragraph on the right, in the right corner, about 6 lines, about 8 lines from the bottom of the page in the Gemara itself. Ki also Rabdimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabdimi came to Babylon from Eretz Yisrael. He said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Shloisha l'shaynos shamati. I heard about 3 different strips of red wool. Ha'achad shel para, one from the Parah Aduma, the red heifer. V'ha'achad shel soyer hamishtaleyach, and one from the goat that was sent away on Yom Kippur, on the Holy of Holies, the goat that was sent to the Mount Azazel and thrown down the mountain. V'achas shel Mitzayra, and one regarding the Mitzayra, one who got the biblical leprosy, and part of his purification situation was we had a red piece of wool that was included in the things that were burnt and put together with him. Says the Gemara. Achas, one of them, Mishkal es asara zuz, one of them weighed 10 zuz. The Achas Mishkal shnei saloim, and one of them weighed 2 saloim, each selah being 4 zuzim, so 8 zuzim. The Achas Mishkal shekel, and one the weight of a shekel, i.e. 4 zuzim. The Ainli lefarish, but I couldn't tell you which one got what. When Rabban came to Babel from Eretz Yisrael, he explained it in the name of Rabbi Yonason. And now we're on today's daf 42A1. 42A1. And it says as follows. Shel para, of the Parah Aduma Mishkal Asara Zuz, which was the heaviest one, it weighed 10 zuz, because it needed to be weighed down so that it would go into the fire and would be burnt up completely so that it could be added as one of the main ingredients in what we know as the mei chatos, the water of the chatos, which was the purifying water of which one was sprinkled when he was contaminated with the corpse. The shel soyer, and the shel soyer mishtaleach, the goat that was sent away to be thrown down Har Azazel on Yom Kippur, mishkal shnei saloim. It weighed 2 saloim 8 zuzim, because it needed to be divided in 2. It got divided in 2. The question is, how come it had to be divided in 2? One part was kept on the animal when it was thrown down. The other part was kept up near the rock, where before it was thrown down, so you could see whether it turned white or red. There's an argument that says, no, that's not what we're talking about. That in fact, we're talking about that the red piece of wool was split between the two goats, between the goat that was sent away, Limishtaleyach, down the mountain, and the other goat that was going to be slaughtered inside the Beis Hamikdash is Kodesh Lashem, as Lashem Chatas for Hashem, a sin offering. And then, of course, Vishal Mitzayra, Vishal Shekel, the Mitzayra, which required neither great weight or length, therefore was no more than a weight of 4 zuzim. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Pliki bar Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta v'Rabbana b'Para. Rabbi Yochanan says that in fact Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta and the Chachamim and the rabbis disagreed with regard to the size of the wool strip with regard to the Para Haduma. Chadam and Mishkal also the Chadam Mishkal Shekel. One said it weighed a very heavy weight of 10 zuzim, and one said, in fact, it weighed only a shekel. And the way to remember this machlokes is that one who does much and one does little, as long as their heart is towards heaven. A famous saying in Shas, one who does a lot, or one who does a little, as long as their heart is towards heaven. So over here, whether you take them, each one is saying the extreme view. One says we need the heaviest one of 10 zuz, and one says we do not. We don't need the whole thing. Okay? And the Gemara is going to explain this in a little bit of time. They weren't arguing in the Para Aduma. They were actually arguing in the goat that is sent away to Harad Soso to be thrown down the mountain. Good morning, Charlie.
Good morning.
Yoma. And on that day that they argued, this in Yeshiva, Rav Bar Kisei passed away. And so they made, in honor of Rav Bar Kisei, they made a siman, a minimum, regarding
mnemonic.
Right, I never can pronounce that correctly. Say it again.
No, just forget. Don't look at the M.
Don't look
first letter, and just mnemonic.
The mnemonic. Forget the M. There you go. Rabbi Bar Kisei mechapik Yisrael mishtaleim. The passing away of Rabbi Bar Kisei atones like the Shora mishtaleach, just like the Seir mishtaleach, the goat that was thrown down the mountain, and forgives. It causes HaKadosh Baruch to forgive because it's like we're being thrown down the mountain. So too, the passing away of a Godol, of a great person, has the power on some level to affect atonement for the generation in which he lived. Because we say that tzaddikim are responsible, Kol Yisrael Aredim Zelazeh, all Jews are responsible one for the other, and tzaddikim are certainly responsible for the generation in which Hashem put them into to lead. So, let's go further. So it's certainly what we have over here is we've got at least three different versions of the red strip, the Para Aduma, the Mitzayra, and the Sioya Mishtaleach. It may very well be it's not just the Sioya Mishtaleach, because that rope was split in half, either for us to have a rope to see if it turns from red to white, or for it to be tied onto the other Sioya that was being used inside the Beis Hamikdash, Hashem Chatas, for Hashem, a sin offering. We're not 100% sure about this, but that's why we have the Gemara, who's going to go into this topic. But now, here we began this Gemara with an uncertainty as to the various weights of the different strings. So the Gemara is going to bring another case of uncertainty. Amar Rav Yitzchak Shtei Shchita Shemati. I heard that there was a distinction between two different slaughterings. Achas shel para, achas shel parai. One for the para haduma, and one for the par, the bull, being used by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. What was it? Achas keshera bizarre, but achas psula bizarre. I heard that if one is slaughtered by a non-kohen, and one is it's valid, and on the other one where it's slaughtered by a non-kohen, it's invalid. But I don't know which one of them is the one we're dealing with. In other words, which one do I say that a zar, it's okay, that it's kasher or bizarre, that it's okay with a non-kohen, it doesn't invalidate the service that follows. So Itma, the Gemara says, Shchit is para yehu para. Regarding the slaughter of the para aduma and the kohen gadol's par on Yom Kippur, Rav and Shmuel, it's a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Chadoma, one says para psula para kishera. The para aduma is possible, is invalid if done by slaughtered by a non-kohen, but the slaughter of the kohen gadol's bull on Yom Kippur, if it was done by a non-kohen, is valid. The Chadoma, just the opposite. Para psula para kishera. In fact, the slaughtering of the kohen gadol's bull is invalid if it's done by a non-kohen, but the slaughter of the para aduma is valid. What's going on? The Rav who para psula. We can figure it out that Rav is the one that says that the para aduma, if it's slaughtered by a zar, by a non-kohen, it's no good. Because Rav Zeira said straight out, the slaughter of the para aduma by a zar, by a non-kohen, is invalid. And on that, the Amar Rav, and Rav came along and said, Rav Allah, Alazar v'chuka sheninu ba. Alazar and the statute have from the Torah says this, because in the case of the para aduma, the pasuk says, "V'nasata oisa el Alazar hakoyen," and you shall give it to Alazar hakoyen, v'haitzi oisa el mechutz lamachne, and he shall take it outside the camp. V'shakat oisa lefanav, and he should slaughter it in front of him. So Rav is explaining that the pasuk clearly goes out of its way to tell us Elazar ben Aaron hakoyen, who's a kohen, telling us therefore that it's a kohen that's got to do the slaughtering. And it says the chukah. It says it's a chayk. It's a v'zayis chukah satorah. This is the chayk of this is the statute of the Torah, meaning it's inviolated, and meaning it's stuck. That's the way it has to be. There's no wiggle room. So therefore, I see very clearly from Rav that Rav is the one who's saying, I learned it from Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, and the word that says V'zayis chukas haTorah. This is Pashas Chukas, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. So therefore, that's what we're learning. So therefore, we see from here that it's the para aduma that requires a kohen. V'Rav, says the Gemara, 1 minute. V'Rav, Maishina para diksiv Alazar v'chuka. What are you explaining with Rav? That he holds, what did Rav explain? That the para aduma requires that the slaughtering done by a kohen, because it says Alazar ben Aaron hakohen, the kohen, and v'zayis chukas haTorah, that there's no wiggle room. Wait a minute. Paru 42:82. Paru nami oksiv Aaron v'chuka. The pasuk says v'hikriv Aaron es para chatos asheloi v'chiper v'shochat es para chatos asheloi, and it starts off v'hoises ois lochem v'chukas oilam, and it should be for you a statute forever l'chaper al b'nei Yisrael, to atone for Klal Yisrael. So what do you see? You see that just like my brother Adum, it says Elazar ben Aaron hakohen b'zayis chukas haTorah. So too it says regarding the bull of the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur. It says Aaron, the hikra of Aaron, and Aaron shall bring, and it says over there chukas olam, a statute forever. So it should be the same thing that a zar, a non-kohen that shechs, that does the slaughtering, should invalidate it. And for the Gemara, no. Shchita lava voidi. We've learned this many times before. The slaughtering is not the service. The actual service is Kabbalah, accepting the blood, Halicha, carrying the blood, Uzerika, and throwing the blood or sprinkling the blood. Slaughtering itself is not part of the sacrificial service. So therefore, when the Torah says regarding the parah of the Kohen Gadol, the bull of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, when it says Zois chukas olam, when it says chukas olam, it's a statute forever. It's only talking about from the point of Kabbalah of accepting the blood, not the slaughter. So, Frank, the obvious question: then what about the paraduma? The paraduma is also an avodah. Well, if it's an avodah, then everything should start after the sacrificing. So why would you say that the shechita of a paraduma is allowed to be done by a zar, is allowed to be done by a non-kohen? Says the Gemara, Shani para the kodshe bedek habayisu. The paraduma is not kodesh hakadoshim. It's only kodshe bedek habayis. If you remember, we explained there's two different things between kedushas domim and kedushas haguf. Kedushas domim means monetary sanctity, meaning that the thing intrinsically is not holy, only its value is holy. The paraduma has a din because, in fact, it's dealt with outside the Beis HaMikdash. It's actually slaughtered on Har HaZeisim, on the Mount of Olives. So therefore, it has a din of Kedushas Domim, of value, of non-physical, only sanctity in its value, which is a lower level than Kedushas Haguf, like the power of the Kohen Gadol, which clearly is brought inside the Heikel. The power of the Kohen Gadol is intrinsically Kedushas Haguf, its body, not just its value, but it itself is intrinsically Kodesh. And we said the great nafkamina, the great difference between the two of them is Kedushas Domim, if you use it inappropriately, the Kedusha, the sanctity falls off. Ein mi'ila acha mi'ila. There is no being moil after you moil it first. There's no using it inappropriately after you've already once used it inappropriately. Because once you use it inappropriately, it falls off its holiness. Ma she'enkein, something that's for kedushas haguf, physical sanctity, intrinsic sanctity. Yesh me'ila acha me'ila. One could be over on me'ila, could transgress on the issue of using it improperly many, many times, because the kedusha does not fall off. The point of this is all of us are bedin kedusha saguf. We are all intrinsically holy. So when we do an avera, we're being moiled in our own hegdish. But the answer is our kedusha does not fall off because we are intrinsically holy. What we have to do is make tshuva. But you can certainly, each time you do an avera, you're being over on the moil hegdish. So Frank the Gemara, but that's not factable. V'lav called the ben nidchenu. Isn't that arguing through a kal v'chayma that the slaughter of the paraduma through Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen should not be considered Zois Chukes HaTorah, should not be a statute? Because if you're going to say that the Aaron HaKohen's slaughtering of his bull Chatas on Yom Kippur, which is an actual avodah, because it's Kedushas Haguf, is not designated by the Torah as a statute. Meaning that a zar, that a non-kohen is allowed to do the shechita, is it not a kal v'chayma that Allah has slaughtered the paraduma, which is not a sacrifice. It's only the Kedushas Domim, monetary holiness, and it's slaughtered outside the Beis HaMikdash, is also not designated as a statute and should be valid by a non-kohen. How could you say madach, something that is an avodah, is allowed to be slaughtered by a non-kohen, that something that does not have the name of an avodah certainly should be allowed to be slaughtered by a non-kohen? So on this, the Gemara gives an answer. Amar Rav Shisha b'reider of Aidi Midi Da'ave Amara is Negoim. You can see just like in regarding the symptoms of tsaras, the lava that is not an avoida, but it requires a member of the kuna. If you remember a few weeks ago, we learned the parsha of Tasriya Mitzoira, and in there it says, if a house shall on its bricks, a nega, some sort of white spot appear on the bricks of the house, it says, Ubo hakoyen. You have to go out and bring the kohen. And until you bring the kohen, the Torah says, empty out your house. Everything remains pure, so take it out. And then the kohen comes and says whether this is tameh or not. And then if the kohen announces it is saras, it is biblical leprosy that is growing on your house, and now everything inside the house is tameh, it's the kohen that sets all this into motion. This is merely looking at a thing and reporting on it. It's not an avodah, and nonetheless, it requires a kohen.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure. Go ahead.
So here we're talking about Zos Chukasalam. To me, a chok is something you can't question. So who cares about the Kal V'chomer? A chok's a chok.
So, very good question. So herein you lie the thing which tells you that, yes, it's a chok, yes, I have to keep it, but if it logically doesn't make any sense, I still have to question my underlying logic. Meaning, if I compare one place where it says chok, and I compare another place where it says chok, they theoretically should match, because we have a rule of Gezeres Shavas, Sad HaShava. We compare like words all the time in the Torah. It's one of the 13 ways in which we learn the Torah. It's one of the basic rules of the Torah. What we're saying over here is, I've got a chayk over here, I got to keep it. I got a chayk over here, I got to keep it. But let me get this straight. This chayk over here, Aaron and his bull on the Kippur. Hi, Daddy. How are you? 4282.
Which one?
4282. Mem base Amid Aleph number 2. So Charlie, back again. Charlie, in other words, you got a chayk over here. You got a statue. Aaron has got to bring his bull. He's got to bring his par in the Beis Hamikdash. Good. But we just finished saying, because it's an avodah, and the service only begins with the accepting of the blood, so I'm allowed to use a zar for the shechita. Okay. So that means where it says a chayk, and it's with an animal, and it's slaughtering, it starts with the Kabbalah. Well, that should be now instant with every chayk that has to do with an animal, so on and so forth. But here we're coming along and saying the Parah Aduma, in fact, is not this way. Number one, it says by the Parah Aduma also chukah, but here's the strange thing, it's even a lower level because it's only the Kedushas Domim and not the Kedushas Saguf. It only has monetary sanctity, not physical sanctity. It doesn't have physical sanctity. And it's slaughtered not in the Beis Hamikdash, it's slaughtered on the Mount of Olives on Har HaZeitsim. And yet you want to come and tell me that there, by that chayk, only a kohen can slaughter it. Mm-hmm. So now it must mean, Charlie, that we're not learning one of the chayks correct. Because you're right, a chayk is unmutable. I can't change it. I still have to know what it means. I got to know what it's asking me about. And if you think through the logic is not being logical at all. So now the Gemara came along and said, I've got a case of a Jewish home that seems to have developed a white spot on it, where I've got to go get a kohen and a kohen only to come and take a look at it.
And that's not an avoda.
And it's certainly not an avodah, right?
Right.
To put it this
Right.
way, Charlie, he gets on his scooter and he scoots down and he takes a look. And in fact, until he gets there, you're allowed to empty out your house of all your stuff so they don't become tummy. And only after he comes along, it says it's tummy, doesn't get tummy. So he's got all the power. It's not an avodah, and yet it requires him.
Got it.
Now, and really what's going on over here is what we're really saying something very interesting. When it's an avodah, we know that avodah starts with the blood, with accepting the blood. Anything prior to that is not an avodah. On the contrary, everything else that's not an avodah to begin with, right? Therefore, is not comparable at all to avodah. So, in fact, exactly what you were driving at, Charlie. So
You can't compare it to the Kohen's.
So even though we've got chayk and chukah in both places, they're not comparable. They each are mutually exclusive and have to be looked at differently. Where the kohen isn't needed, he's needed. The avodah is a different ballgame. So even though logic would tell me just like by the avodah, a zar is allowed to do the shechita, so everywhere else. But once you go in and begin to analyze, it's a different ballgame. Okay, so let's go a little further. But according, we're on 4282 right-hand column. But according to Shmuel, who said just the opposite, that the Kohen Gadol's bull is invalid if it's done by a zar, by a non-Kohen. But a para aduma is allowed to be slaughtered by a non-Kohen. What is the difference between the Kohen Gadol's bull where it says Aaron, it says Vehikriv Aaron is parachatos, and it says Luchukas Oilam, Paranami Haksiv Elazar Bechuka. The Paraduma says Vinasata Oisel Elazar Akoye, Vizois Chukas HaTorah. So the rules should be the same. And for the Gemara, it says like this: Shani Hasam Dixi by Vishochat Oisel Lefanav. By Elazar HaKoyin, it says, "V'nesata oisel Elazar HaKoyin, v'hoitzi oisel mechutz lamachne, v'shochat oisel, and he shall slaughter it lefanov, in front of him." Who's the in front of him? Shehezah shoichet be'Elazar. Shmuel says it must mean this extra word lefanov, in front of him, that a non-koyin slaughters it while Elazar HaKohen watches him to make sure that he does it correctly. Very good point. You got an extra word in the pasuk. The pasuk should have pulled up short and said the shachat oisa, and he slaughters it. What's the lefanov? Says Shmuel. The lefanov is obvious. The lefanov is exactly what we just said. The lefanov is that a non-kohen slaughters it, and the kohen, in this case Elazar HaKohen, goes in and watches. So for Rav, what does Rav do with this lefanov? Shmuel's got a very good point that it sure looks like the kohen is not the one that does the shechita by the para aduma. Somebody else does it. So he says, no, I learned out that he's not allowed to divert his attention from it. We're on 4283. 4283, the bottom of the Amid, today's Amid 40, Membes Amid Aleph. 4283.
You're on Amid Aleph?
I'm on Amid Aleph, yeah.
Oh.
On the bottom of Amid Aleph. That's 4283 on the bottom, towards the bottom. So it means that Elazar shall not divert his attention from it. Meaning that when it comes to the Para Aduma, you got to be laser-like attention to what you're doing. Because these Para Adumas are so infrequent, and that anything that goes wrong will invalidate it. So you got to have complete focus. So try to come out with a good point. Ushmuel shelo yisir data minoloy. How does Shmuel therefore know that the slaughterer, the one that's slaughtering, which according to Shmuel can even be a non-Jew, right? Even a non-Jew shall not divert his attention from it. Says the Gemara, Nafkalei, Visara Besapara Le'enov, and he shall burn the cow before his eyes. This means that he shall not divert his attention while burning it, and therefore that applies also to the slaughter. Okay? Okay, because it should have just said, because the pasuk could have said, Visara says para, what's le'enov, to his eyes. That means that you got to have complete das, said the Rav, and Rav therefore has to account for the word einov, eyes. The Rav chad b'shchita v'chad b'streifa. That in what he agrees that before his eyes teaches one, he agrees that the einov is also coming to tell us about mesiach das, that you're not allowed to divert your attention. But I need both words. I need le'enov and lefanov. I need both words to teach me, one with regard to the slaughter and one with regard to the burning. Vitzaricha. And I needed both. According to Rav, I need twice for the person to teach me I'm not allowed to divert my attention both from the slaughter of the paraduma and the burning of the paraduma. Because if the merciful one and the Torah had written only with regard to the shchita lifanov, that the deer you're not allowed to be mesiach das, you're not allowed to be inattentive, mishum the tchilas habaydi, because this is the beginning of the service. Now we're beginning to deal with the paraduma, with all the bells and whistles. So abo serefa emaloi, but once you get into the avodah, I don't have to be laser-like attention. Therefore, tzaricha. Because of Rachmana b'Sereifa, but if the Torah had only written by the burning, I would have said Mishum the Hastu to be the Miskashra Para, because it's only at that point that the Paraduma becomes fit to be Mitayat Tamayim, to purify the contaminated. Because why are we dealing with the Paraduma? Only so that we could burn it and its ashes should go into the water and create what we know as the meichata, so that we can spray it on the people who are tumas meis, that are contaminated with corpse contamination, which is the whole purpose of shchita, which is only the beginning of the process, which is only, you need to do shchita to begin the process of pulling together the meichatas of the paraduma. Emaloi, I don't need laser-like attention. Tzericha. We need it. So now, therefore, what is it coming to exclude then? What other part of the paraduma is it coming to exclude? In other words, you're telling me, lefanov, you got to be completely laser-like attention at the beginning, at the shchita. Then I got le'enov, by the eyes, to tell me I've got to have laser-like attention at the end, in the shchita, at the point of the burning. By being specific of lefanov and einov, you're obviously coming to tell me that somewhere else within the process, my laser-like attention is not necessary. What am I saying? If I'm saying to exclude asipas afro unile mayim lekiddush, the gathering of the ashes and the filling of the water for the mixing, which is to create the meichatos. We're now on Amid Beis. Daddy, we're on Amid Beis now. 42b1. Lemishmeris lemeinidksiv. That can't be, because the pasuk says straight up, as a safekeeping for water of sprinkling is that's needed. If you take a look on the side of the article, the left side in the Gemara side, it says the Torah HaSholem. Just to read the pasuk, you can see how detailed it is. V'osaf ish tahar is efer apara, the ashes of the para, v'niach michutz lamachne, and he puts it outside the camp in mokantar, in a holy place. V'hoyol la'adas b'nei Yisrael, and it shall be for the assemblage of b'nei Yisrael l'mishmeres, for a watch. L'mei nidach chatosi, It's unbelievable how every single point here, where you have to stand, where you gotta take it, what the place has to be like. So you see, it says, "L'mishmeris l'mei nido." So so what is it coming to exclude from laser-like attention? Hashlochas eitz erez ve'eitzah b'shni selas. It's coming to exclude the casting of the cedar wood and the hyssop and the red wool, the lav goof and the paraninu, which is not part of the animal itself. These are outside variables that need to be brought in to be thrown into the fire as part of the ingredients and the mixture that will create the mechatos. Nonetheless, because they're not in the animal itself, it's not in the paraduma itself, it's an outside variable that's being brought in, the wood and the woolen strip, red strip. Therefore, I don't need laser-like attention. Now the Gemara says, Itma shchitas para bizarre. It says, regarding the slaughter of the paraduma by a non-kayin, Rabbi Ami Yoma kosher. Rabbi Ami says it's kosher. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka Ama Pasula, invalid. Ula Ama Keshera. Ula says it is good, like Rabbi Ami, and like Rebbe before. But Ami Lo Psula, and others, and Ula says, and others report that it's no good. Now, the Gemara once again is going to come and try to bring another raya that Rav's point that a non-Jew slaughtering the paraduma is no good.
Not a non-Jew, a non-Kohen.
A non-Kohen. What did I say? A non-Jew? Mistake. Let me repeat. That a non-Kohen, a Zor, a non-Kohen, that's just actually daddy, that may not even be true. Because if a
guy is not allowed to share. It's nevela, same as nevela.
That's true. But in a regular chulin, our meats that we get from the butcher shop, a guy is allowed to shecht with a Yisrael oimer al gabov. We actually hold la halacha that a Yisrael is oimer gabov because
I don't think so.
No, not so.
I don't think so.
Excuse me, Yitzchak. I
Yes.
thought that in the Gemara, when they use the word zar, it's a non-Kohen.
Yeah, it is a non-Kohen. It is a non-Kohen.
Okay, in the Gemara, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Even Omer al Gabo by guy, it's not good.
So let me ask you, Jerry, do we allow a cotton? Can a cotton shecht the shecht? You're the
No.
expert.
Do we allow what?
A cotton, a child. Can a child slaughter?
No.
No.
Okay, so I'm just letting you all know, we all have to wait until we get to Chulin, and I'm telling you this.
But that's not the psak. That's not
That's
psak.
not the psak. That's true. All right. But when we get to keep in 5 years from now, keep this, we should all be in good health. We should, when we get to it, let's remember this conversation.
5 years from now, you expect, I can't remember next week.
All right.
5 years, all right.
Okay,
All
but right now, if a guy shechts and a Jew is Omer al Gabo, it's not good.
No good. So
It's
anyways,
an
anyways, for sure, the Gemara over here is talking about a non-Jew, a
non-Kohen.
non-Kohen. So goes like this. So there we go. I'm sorry. So Moshe Rabbi Yeshua he's coming to challenge. He's coming to challenge Shmuel from a pasuk because they're trying to bring a riot to Rav Shita that is Zor, a non-Kohen that slaughters a paraduma is invalid. What he called that is slaughtered makes it invalid. Okay, and here we go. It says the Bryce like this. I only know regarding the sprinkling, the actual sprinkling of the water of the mechatas, that it's not valid if it's done by a woman. And it's only good during the day. That's because the pasuk clearly says ish. The pasuk goes out of its way. It says ish, and it says biyoim, and it says biyoim. So, let me go further over here. I'm sorry, I lost the place. Anyway, B'minayin l'rabba shchitase b'kabolas dama b'azah domo usreifotza b'lishchas eitz erev be'ezeh mishlisalas. How do I know that it has to be done by daytime? The slaughter, the receiving of the blood, the sprinkling of the blood 7 times toward the sanctity, the burning and the casting of the wood, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the red wool, all has to be Talmud Loima Torah. It says Torah, the law. Therefore, I should think, therefore, it should include the gathering of the ashes and the filling of the water and the mixing of the water with the ashes also by day. Talmud Loima Zois. It says Zois. The word Zois, this Zois Chukas HaTorah. This is the chukah of the Torah, which we're getting to in about 3-4 weeks from now. Pashas Chukas, actually the ofruf of my and Shabbos Kala of my daughter. So the Pashas Chukas, right, that narrows it down. This, but not something else. What's then something else? Talmud Lamed Zois, Freit the Gemara, Ma'ari Yisel Rabbis Eselu Va'itzu Eselu. Why do I look to include the first things, the shechita, the receiving of the blood, the sprinkling of the blood by day, and exclude the gathering and filling and mixing of the ashes from the daytime requirement? Since the Torah goes along and goes ahead from the word Torah, which is to include, and then the Torah says Zois, which is to narrow. Amrit, right? Torah is wide, is expansive, and Zois, this, but not something else, is narrow. Amrit, Hare, Onu La Lamedin Kulon Ma Zois Memel. I come to say, we learn from this that the sprinkling of the water, just like the sprinkling of the water is not good by a woman, but it's like when it's done by a man. It's only good by day. That's only good by day. Okay, because the pasuk says, Ishtar, a man who's taught. The Hiza by Yoma Shlishi by day, the 3rd day and the 7th day. So it's clear that it can only be done by an ish, tar, by Yoim, and by day. Therefore, I would say that everything would have to be hoyov and kishara be ish, since all of them, everything, including the mixing of the ash, is not good if done by a woman, when it needs to be done by a man, because the pasuk clearly says, we're on, by the way, 42b2, the pasuk clearly says that these procedures have to be done either by a Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen or by a Kohen itself. The pasukim seem to say, and kisharim ela b'yoyim, they're only valid by day. I exclude the gathering of the ashes and the filling of the water and the mixing of the water, because you're allowed, the mixing is allowed to be done by a woman as well as a man. It's good the whole time, because there's nothing in the Torah with regard to the actual mixing that seems to limit it to a man. So, Frank the Gemara, Mahai Tiyufta. What's the challenge over here? If you want to say the fact that the shechita, etc., and the sprinkling is invalid done by a woman, therefore you should also say just a woman is obviously a zar, a non-kohen, non-person who normally does the avodah. You should say that is Zar, which will refute Shmuel, who says that the slaughter of the Parah Aduma is valid when slaughtered by a Zar, by a non-Kohen. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. Hazor me'me'o techich. But the sprinkling of the water will show that they're not linked. Shepsulim be'isho k'sherim bizar. Because you see that the sprinkling of the water is invalid by a woman, but is actually valid by a zar. Is invalid if a non-Kohen sprinkles the contaminated people with the ash. Because where it says ish, it's klolius, but it does not answer. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaya, Haine Tiyukta. This is the Tiyukta. Isha Mai Tama. Why does the Baraisa disqualify a woman from performing the slaughter of the Parah Aduma? Alaza v'lo Isha. Because the Baraisa says, Alaza ben Aaron HaKoyin, meaning the man Alaza and not a woman. Zar Nami, Alaza v'lo Zar. Also Alaza and not a Zar. So therefore, from over here, we see that, that Shmuel Shita, that a Zar is allowed to slaughter the Parah Aduma, is extraordinarily difficult. We're going to stop here by Oma Ula, because now the Gemara, this is much longer thing. Now, tomorrow,